And instead of leaning away from this desire to be healthy, which is by and large a construct built with the intent to keep Black folks out, we instead want to punish ourselves, discipline and punish ourselves into being and presenting as what we understand to be as healthy. And the reality is that none of us will ever exist as that, for a number of reasons.
It's a foreign man in a foreign land.
Where my critique sort of comes in with health is that when you look at health historically, you think about how health is constructed. Some of the earliest signs of medical diagnosis that happened in the U.S. date back to folks like Samuel Cartwright, right, and other white supremacists, other eugenicists, other white anthropologists who created entire diagnoses as a way to punish slaves for revolting. And so that is the foundation of health in the world. It is the foundation of how we understand health. And then now you have the World Health Organization, which obviously applies to more than just the U.S., that describes health as being physically safe, mentally secure, and something else, right? But we know that as a Black person in the world, you can literally be murdered for sleeping, right? We know that as a Black person in the world, you can go undiagnosed for something because of anti-Black doctors, right? We know that being Black in the world, Black folks who are capable of giving birth experience disproportionate mortality rates during birth, right? We know all these different things that directly affect Black folks. And so we know that if that's the definition of health, then Black folks cannot be healthy irrespective of what we try to do. And so instead of trying to punch down at folks for refusing to or being unable to adjust to the ways that whiteness sort of forces us, or the box that whiteness forces us into, we, I think, should instead be focused on how these structures are created as an attempt, or as a way, rather, not an attempt, it does happen, as a way to further marginalize us. And that is the foundation of health and anti-fat violence in the world, and what I think is more important to talk about.
Fuck. That messed me up. I ain't gonna lie. Like, that really messed me up. Like, that is a lot to really digest, pun intended. And I mean, just like, it fucked me up, and it's also very liberating. Like, I can eat oxtail, I can eat pork grill, I could eat cornbread, I can eat all of these things and live. That is a revolutionary, and not just live, but live well. Like, and you're so let me tell you why you're so right. Because my 95-year-old nana is alive and well. This woman cooking right now, I can't stop her from cooking. I swear to you, Deshaun. Like, I tried, like, I can't stop this woman from cooking. That's how she shows her love. But if I go to her house right now, she cooking pork ribs with a slab of different ingredients on it. And like, she got the peas and rice. She got some collard greens up inside that mix. She 95. She walking. She going up.
I need an invite.
Listen, you are invited. The fuck, like, of course. Like, and like, the fact of the matter is, like, she living, and she living well. And in many ways, she living better than some of these white folks that is very limited. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But like, they followed all of the advice. They ate food with no seasoning. I got a video on the racism of people who don't use seasoning coming soon. I could deal with that, because there's a lot of classism involved with that as well. People who use seasoning and people who don't. But like, when you say, maybe you do realize it, but when you say that you can eat what you want to eat, you can eat the things that are culturally significant to you and still lead a healthy life, that you break in shackles. Like, I feel chains breaking, you know what I say? Like,
and you know, what I'm also saying is that you can eat all these things and still die, right? I think that is also what I'm saying. Is that that's true. I think that we spend so much time being like, okay, well, I gotta get in the gym, and I gotta I gotta eat 3 times a day with 2 different snacks, and I gotta make sure that all those meals are like white meat chicken and baked chicken with no seasoning and
Chicken
all
breast.
the things, right? You know, like all these things that we feel like we're supposed to do. And I got to make sure I meditate, and I got to make sure that I do yoga, and I got to make sure I do all these things. And then you walk out the door and you get shot by a police officer. Or then you develop some type of cancer, and your doctor doesn't diagnose you because you're black, or because you can't even get to a doctor in the first place, right? Like, I think that yes, it is true that you can eat these things and still lead a quote unquote healthy life, right? And I'm saying quote unquote because, like I just named, I don't believe that black folks by any way of life are able to be healthy according to the definition of health. But you can also do all those things and still die, right? And so what I think is more important is that we get clear about what is killing us. Why are we dying? What is leading to our deaths, right? And the reality is that it's not what people are saying it is. It's not fatness by itself. And I think that becomes the biggest issue for me. And then we push exercise as a punishment and not say, hey, maybe you should just, move as much as you can because to do something that your body enjoys doing, right? I'm someone who advocates for people, what I call is my daily movement practice, right? I have no interest in quote unquote working out. I have no interest in quote unquote exercising, but I do the same things that a lot of people who do call themselves people who work out or exercise or go to the gym or whatever. But I have no interest in calling it that because oftentimes what we associate with exercise, what we associate with working out is this idea that you must lose weight, right? Or you must punish yourself until you do lose the weight. And instead, what I'm invested in is movement, is in showing myself that we can just move as a way to enjoy being in motion, that we deserve the reality or the possibility of just being in motion, and not punishing ourselves because we're taught that you shouldn't be fat and so you must punish yourself until you're not fat. And so that is what is very important to me. And I see people saying to talk about stress, sugar, and salt. And so, yeah, I think that someone also said exercise is a pretty terrible way of losing weight, to be honest, which is very true. And yet it's very true. It has made the gym industry and the diet industrial complex 2 of the biggest multi-billion-dollar industries in the world, because that's what we've been taught to buy into. But anywho, yes, so stress and all of these things also contribute very heavily to our way of life, right? It over-determines how soon we die, right? Yes. And we all know that niggas in the world are stressed out. Yes. There's no way to be black in the world and not be stressed out because of anti-blackness. And so, again, this is why I think it's very important to focus on what is killing us. What's killing us? And it's not being fat. It's not eating grandmama's cooking, right? And until we get past this thinking, and I'm not saying anything that doesn't have loads of research. I got books right here behind me, all the things that I've read. I got books. Because they're going to come for that. On all things that I've read, right? These are things that I research every single day. These are not the things that are killing us. And until we get past that idea, we will continue to recreate the very same dynamics and the very same white supremacist anti-black teachings that have led us to this moment. Absolutely.
That, and I mean, like snaps, finger snaps, and air horns for all of that. This idea of the laborious weight under not only just capitalism and these different systems, but just anti-blackness in general, especially being in the States. When I was in the States, like I'm back in the Bahamas right now, as like, I like it is what it is. Like, it's like I could take, I legit could, I'm not one of the strongest soldiers. Like after a while, like it really got like, I felt this dread to show. And like, I mean, like I was in Iowa. So I mean, I know you were in HBCU. I was in a PWI. So we didn't have
HBCU wasn't much better, I promise.
Really? What?
Yeah, it just was black. It just the politics were the same, but it was just around a bunch of black people, which was great.
I've heard that actually. No, I've heard that. No, you're right. I mean, I've heard like a lot of the black excellence tropes and everything like that could be just as painful and limiting as the white supremacist tropes, but even worse because sometimes like you got the black, and I got that right now. Like I got like people that are like have the same accent, got the same, you know the same music and everything, but then they'll come out with some shit about like, these gay niggas, they need fire and brimstone. They could get the reckoning. I'm like, damn. Like I'm just like, bro,
Right.
bro, your uncle, like, bro, like we know, like, come on, like, how you gonna say that? But like it's something about American white supremacy that just hits. Like it's something about it, and I've spoken like with a lot of my colleagues, FD Signify, and everybody who, by the way, loves your work as well. And they would like, I've had like this quibble with them, because I'm just like, yeah, like anti-blackness is pervasive, it's universal. However, like y'all got something going on in the States and like that shit like really that shit hit different. And like I remember seeing a tweet, and it was a TikTok in a tweet about like how I think it was a woman that went to Europe, ate everything that they wanted. She ate everything that they wanted, came back thinking, okay, I must have gained like 1 million pounds. I got to go to the gym. Found out that they didn't gain much weight at all. And of course, like, the anti-fatness aside from that, it has like a lot of commentary on just the existence of being in the States, not only from the way that they're making the food and whatnot, like who knows, like the food tastes good, but I mean, and maybe you might have some thoughts on this, but just like being in the States and just the access that you have to foods and everywhere else in contrast have a different causality and conclusion on the way that you like store fat, like the way that like, all of these different things. So like my question about this, and like I had like a lot of questions inside the comments asking about this part as well, is just like this idea behind this rebrand of fatness. I mean, that was the title of the video. People were just like, okay, this is a conspiracy. Like, are you meaning to tell me that like everybody came up with this idea that, fatness was once like revered to be this wealthy, socially canonical and uplifted and revered status symbol, and now like because some black folks are fat now, like so my question to you is just like exactly like, how did that fat rebrand happen? I'd really like to know like your opinion on that, and like also like this idea, there's also like some commentary on this idea about like blackness and fatness, because not all black folks are fat, but like in the transatlantic slavery like rebrand of fatness part, it was interesting to see that like that was a rebrand because they noticed that some slaves were fat. Anyway, I'd like to go and hear like what you got to say about that, because like it's something that been quibbling in my head too.
Yeah. So one, I have to say something to Crashing Phantom in the chat that I am not saying that HBCUs are the same as PWIs. What I named was that they're not much different, which is true. What I appreciated about my HBCU was that I got to experience a lot of black folks from all over the world, right? I had friends from Sri Lanka, friends from Burundi, friends from the Bahamas, friends from, like all over the world, all of which were black. And that much I appreciate it. And you cannot get that anywhere else. You just can't. And yet HBCUs still reproduce the very same anti-black respectability politics that we all know and hate. So I had to say that first before responding to your question, just because I saw that. But I got to close the chat now because I won't keep looking at them. I'll go back to them later. But to your question, yes. So I love this question a lot because it always gives me a chance to just sort of marvel over one of my favorite people, who is Dr. Sabrina Strings. She wrote a book titled Fear in the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia. And that book gives you the most in-depth historical analysis of the connection between what she calls fat phobia and white supremacy. And to me, I don't think you I don't think you get a better thing to read. I think that if you're looking for a sort of primer on the connection between fat phobia and white supremacy, that's the go-to. And so what she writes in that book, and she's engaging from primary sources, y'all. So this is not just like, a random person making things up. This is someone who does research for a living. This is extensive research being done. What she writes in that book, in just the introduction, is that anti-fatness becomes a coherent ideology essentially through the making of the slave. And by that, what I mean is that during the 19th century, 20th century, in the midst of the transatlantic slave trade, what happened was Europeans and white Americans saw slaves, and they were like, y'all look hefty, and also y'all are hefty, and it looks ugly. It doesn't look good. We don't like it. It's very, but they started to ascribe their religious framing to it, right? So through the spread of Protestant Christianity and through the transatlantic slave trade, it's where you get anti-fatness, right? Because they're like, this is not only grotesque, but it's also unrighteous. It's unholy. It's sinful, right? It's dark.
That
it's
shit
violent,
is so crazy,
right? It's outrageous. It is outrageous to me, but that is the making of anti-fatness as an actual ideology. Because before then, I want to be clear. People do say, like, well, at one point in history, fatness was revered. It was thought of to represent wealth and all the things. That is partially true. At different points in time throughout history, fatness has been seen as both good and as bad, right? But it didn't become a coherent ideology. It didn't become something that stuck, that had structures built around it until slavery. And that is important because white folks have always been fat in the same ways that fat folks have always been fat. But it wasn't until the creation of race, the creation of anti-blackness, the creation of slaves, the creation of these ideologies, right, that this becomes an actual thing that is organized around, and wherein entire structures are created as a way to punish fat people. And that is how fatness becomes coterminous with blackness. And so, yes, not all black folks in the world are fat, and yet all black folks in the world experience anti-fatness, even if only the residue of such, because of how violent anti-fatness is and how much it has been defined in relationship to blackness, right? So this is why someone like Serena Williams, who we know is not fat, can walk into a doctor's office and be read as obese, in the same ways that I bet you, Foreign, could go to a doctor's office and be read as obese, right?
And how?
We looking at you, we know that Foreign is not a fat man, right? But we also know that because of how these things are constructed, that's how oftentimes violent, right, these things can be. This is why I include George Floyd in chapter 4 of my book, because George Floyd was not a fat man, but he was tall and he was muscular. And because of how his body was structured, they used his health issues and also the stature of his body as justification for why he was murdered. And that is important because when we start talking about how fat folks are engaged, right, what we have to be clear about is the fact that this connection between fatness and blackness is what creates the conditions for policing. It is what creates the conditions for the medical industry as we know it, right? It is what creates the conditions for the diet industry, for the gym industry, for all of these things that have been violent to not just fat people, but black folks by and large. And the non-black folks who experience this violence are only experiencing the residue of the violence that their bodies help to maintain. And I want to say that again. The only white folks who experience anti-fatness are experiencing it because of or are experiencing the residue that their bodies help to sustain, that they help to maintain, right? By way of whiteness. And so all that is to say, again, I talk a lot. You ask me questions and they make me get in my bag real quick. but all that is to say that this is the history between anti-fatness as anti-blackness. And so what Strings sort of details later on in her book is that at a certain point, you know, after all the raping and pillaging of West African communities, right, at some point slave owners had to determine, or had to make a distinction between who was fat, or rather who was black and who was not. And part of the way that they did that was by looking at their bodies and saying, if you looked like this, if you were fat, you were read as black, right? You were a slave. That was how they determined who was and was not black, who was and was not a slave. Fast forward, right, to the 1950s, 1960s, where you get the creation of the gym and exercise industry as they exist today, where you get the creation of the diet industry as they exist today, right? Where Kellogg's, you know, all of us love Kellogg's cereal, right? We love our Kellogg's cereal, and yet Kellogg's started off as something that was supposed to be a very bland food, as a way to control typically women, but more than just women, to control how folks ate, thinking that if you could control how someone ate, you could also control how often they had sex, right? So the idea was that if you control their eating habits, then you can also make them abstinent. It was a way to sort of implement this sort of purity, right? That was being developed through the spread of Protestant Christianity. That is the origin of dieting in the world, right? That is the origin of dieting. It is a way, and there's always been a connection between dieting and abstinence from sex. It has always been a way to control how people have sex, or whether or not people do have sex, right? And so you think about that, and you think about the origins of gyms in this country, right, and their connection to fascism, how they have oftentimes been used as a way to build fascists. That's also a very long history. And then you fast forward, right, even further to the 2000s, this heroin chic era, where because of how much of the population in the U.S. in particular was made up of black folks who were also fat, you get the origin of the modern war on obesity, where the CDC releases an entire report saying that 400,000 Americans a year were dying from obesity, and then they a year later have to retract that statement because it wasn't true. They developed an entire theory based off of 30-year-old data, where they said, well, this amount of fat people died at that point in time, and this amount of thin people were not dead. So we're just going to say that they died because they were fat. That literally is the science behind the obesity epidemic, right? But that leads to government-funded science projects. It leads to government-funded programs. It leads to the building of entire campaigns through mass media efforts. And it also leads to the criminalization and the demonization in different ways of fat bodies in the medical industry. Who do you think was most affected by these things? Niggas. And so because of that, right, this is all the long, very complicated, very intricate history that we have with the connection between fatness and blackness. And I think that we're in 5 to 10 to 15 years, we're also going to see how that has been expanded by the ways that COVID has been responded to. But that's a different conversation. So this is, it's a long thread, and it's a very complicated thread. It's a very thorough thread, but it's a very important one to understand, because we are not making this shit up. these folks have been targeting Black folks from the beginning of time, and continue to through different efforts to control our bodies and how we show up in the world. There are also many of us who exist at all of those intersections, right? At one time, we can't really compartmentalize ourselves in the ways that disciplines oftentimes require us to, or in the ways that that sort of academia requires people to. And so I wanted to write something that, to me, felt true to who I am, and that not represented, but that gave language to experiences of other fat Black trans folks. So particularly trans masc folks, non-binary folks, but also for cis men. There are a lot of cis men in the world who are fat or who are larger, who experience anti-fatness and likely don't have the language for it. And so that's what Belly the Beast does. It's supposed to be able to provide a different analysis. And so in the book, I'm rather critiquing things like body positivity. I'm talking about desirability. I'm talking about the ways that anti-fatness plays a significant role in police murders and who police choose to murder, right? And in the sort of carcerality of anti-fatness. In the book, I'm writing through the impossibilities of health as a concept, as an idea. I'm talking about the war on drugs, the connection between the war on drugs and the war on obesity. I'm talking about gender and fatness. There are just a lot of different things under the sort of umbrella anti-fatness as anti-Blackness. And so it is, I think, a thorough but short book. And I wrote that way intentionally because I wanted folks to be able to not get so distracted by the length that they didn't really dive into what the book is trying to offer. And so, yes, there is another book on the horizon. It will likely be longer, and I'll have a lot more to say, but I wanted to introduce folks to the concept of where I am and what I'm thinking through before we get into the nitty gritty for real.
Oh, Lord, I am excited for that shit. Like, I swear to you, so in the Caribbean, I mean, like, we have like a lot of, and thank you for that very, very adept way of, and shoots. Of course, you can't even hit all of the beats that the book hits because it's just, even though it's very condensed, it's extremely it reaches like a lot of different points and makes like a lot of different connections and closes like a lot of synapses that I didn't even realize could be closed. Of course, like, we know that. Thank you for all the super chats. Listen, I just didn't want to stop Deshaun from spitting because they were spitting. And I just want to read this real quick. Enjoy your book. Saw your talk with Seattle Public Library. King of Reads introduced me. Keep on sharing. Yes, I did. I clipped that video from King of Reads and I interpolated it because just like the statement, not only is anti-Blackness related to anti-fatness, it's one of the same. It's in a very, very close way synonymous. So that in itself, that statement, I think you understand how controversial and polemic just saying that is. Like, because it then says that, it then in a way kind of communicates that Blackness is synonymous with fatness. Mm-hmm. So let me tell you something, Deshaun. I know you probably get even more because you wrote a book on it. Like, when you write a book on something, it's different. When I put it inside my little last video, let me tell you something. They came down with pitchforks, fire, brimstone. I
know they did.
Oh, Lord. Oh, and it was Black folks, for real. Like, it was mostly Black folks that were just like, how dare you? Like, this is my keyboard, Twitter fingers. How dare you? How dare you try to, like, relate these things? And it was almost just like a shut off. Like, it wasn't even something to be entertained in the thought process. Like, you don't even want it for a second. And that in itself reveals the fatphobia.
Yep.
It reveals anti-fatness. She's just like, okay, so why are you so vehemently adamant that you had to write a whole epistle inside the comment section to say that, how dare you connect these two together? So can you touch on that? Like, this polemic statement to say that anti-blackness is anti-fatness and vice versa. What's the thought process behind it? Can you unwrap like the controversial nature of it, so forth and so forth?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that we are, I think that we underestimate how deeply indoctrinating anti-fatness and slash as anti-blackness is. And by that, I mean that I think folks oftentimes, black folks, right, we're taught that everything about how we exist in the world is unhealthy, right? That the food that we eat that are a part of our cultures, that the ways that we move throughout the world, that the ways that we talk to each other, that the ways that our bodies are built, etc., are just unhealthy, that they're violent, that they're not good, right? And so because of that, we sort of internalize this, and then we project it onto other black folks in a way that for the most part makes us embarrassed of the fact that our bodies are different, right? Even the thinnest of black folks look very different from the people who things like the BMI were modeled after, right? These structures are modeled after European, after French white men, Scottish white men, right? Black folks do not look like French and Scottish white men. I don't care what you look like. You do not look like French and Scottish white men. But we're embarrassed by this fact that there is a possibility that we could look different than what we have been taught to not want to look like, or not look like in the first place, or not act like in the first place. And so I think that a lot of the vitriolic response that you will get to naming anti-fatness as anti-blackness is from black folks who are beholden to this idea that we deserve to be punished for our bodies, and that we must punish others for their bodies, and that we deserve to be punished for our quote unquote eating habits, and that we must punish others for their eating habits. And instead of leaning away from this desire to be healthy, which is by and large a construct built with the intent to keep black folks out, we instead want to punish ourselves, discipline and punish ourselves into being and presenting as what we understand to be as healthy. And the reality is that none of us will ever exist as that, for a number of reasons. And so, yeah, I think that's the reason for the vitriol that we get to naming anti-fatness as anti-blackness.
That is an excellent packaging of that. The idea, it's almost like sadistic, like how we're very committed to this bit, like committed to these tropes that aren't even endemic to us. And when I say us, I just mean people of color and marginalized folk in general. It is a white supremacist trope. And like what trips my mind up is knowing the audience and the community that we've cultivated here. Yet in the same breath, like we could attack white supremacy, we could attack patriarchy, we could attack transphobia, homophobia, all these things. And as soon as like we bring up like fatphobia and anti-fatness, it's just like, that's come on now, you had me.
That's not.
Which is amazing.
You're not supposed to talk about that.
Nah, like, and so like, and it's amazing. Like in the Caribbean, like we're very invested in desirability politics, and just the idea and the aesthetic of looking good. We got people like Rihanna as ambassadors of Caribbean culture, this exotification of the divine femininity that Caribbean people have. And yeah, I know, all kind of things that make my skin crawl as well. And it's this interesting dynamic where like we have very unhealthy ways to get healthy. You know, like we do the crazes. I saw someone link. So I just see if BMI is for everyone. Okay, yeah, this is something in this is a proponent of our argument. If BMI is for everyone, why is there an adjustment for black folks when it comes to kidney, liver, and all this sort of stuff? Yeah, precisely. There's all kind of things like this. But like what I would love to pick your brain on is the unhealthy lengths that we go through in order to become healthy. I saw someone list Ozempic, which is just one of the many anti-fat fads of trying to, I'm not sure like if you're up to speed on just exactly what it is. If you are,
Yeah.
I please educate me because like I understand like it's a diabetic drug. What's the 411 on it?
It is a drug that is typically used for folks who are diabetics. Yes. And more recently, folks have sort of turned it into a new wave of flat tummy teas, right? Where now folks are buying this drug, oftentimes off the market, sometimes through doctors prescribing them, as a way to lose weight, right? It's supposed to quell your appetite or something of that sort, and some of the side effects are weight loss, and so folks have been using it as another like quick way to lose weight. But it is a very violent thing to do. One, because it takes medicine out of the hands of diabetics, right, which is a very necessary thing. But two, because it forces you to lose weight. One, in a way that is particularly unhealthy, right? It's rapid oftentimes. It doesn't consider the ways that your body will respond to this drug, and other things. But that is just another dynamic of the diet industrial complex, right? Where so much about weight loss drugs in general has been generated around very, very, very violent science, that people have bought into as a way to control their size by way of controlling how they look, right? That is generally the entire purpose of weight loss, and oftentimes even of weight gain. Weight gain and weight loss are all supposed to make you look a particular way, so long as that way is not fat. And so there's just a lot there to be discussed. But with Ozempic in particular, it's just particularly violent because of who it takes away from and how it sort of reasserts or reifies this idea that weight loss is necessary irrespective of how it harms you or anyone else.
Yeah, that's just such a great way of bringing into the fold the intersection between fat, like anti-fat rhetoric, and also just disability politics, and just like how those worlds are very married together, in some ways.
Yes.
The same world. So I think that, like, and you talk about this in your book, and that really like blew my mind a lot as well. Can you talk a little bit about like this relationship between disability politics and also anti-fatness and fat activism?
Yes, there is this sort of intrinsic overlap between the two, particularly because of how fatness is sort of marketed, advertised, thought of as a disability, right? As something that is debilitating, and for some fat folks, it is, right? And I want to be clear that my politic is one that acknowledges and honors the fact that for some people, fatness is debilitating, and that also is okay. And so the overlap, the sort of connection between the work that we do is that a lot of fat activists and a lot of disabled activists, or fat scholars and disabled scholars, however you want to refer to us, are rather very focused on just determining what disability justice looks like, and determining that by way of also determining what fat liberation looks like. And I want to be clear as well that fat liberation is not necessarily a term that I ascribe to, because I think that I have a very different understanding of anti-fatness and the ways that it is constructed. And by that, I mean that for there to be a sort of obliteration of anti-fatness, or for there to be a fat liberation, there must also be a Black liberation. And I think when we start talking about Black liberation, it gets very complicated, because then we want to talk about what we can and cannot hold on to, what we must be married to, or what we, all these things. But I think that we have to first acknowledge that the cultures, traditions, things that we are married to, that are a part of who we are born from anti-black violence, and we don't want to acknowledge that. So that's a different conversation. But anyway, to go back to addressing your initial question, and I'm glad we're on the same page there. But to go back to your question, yeah, there is an intrinsic overlap between fat scholarship and disability justice or disability politics, and those of us who are in those respective fields are thinking deeply about the ways that they connect, and trying to figure out exactly what it looks like to destroy the very structures that make way for, or that construct a need for, anti-fatness and ableism at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yes. No. That's it's scratching a lot of itches for me. Like I'm talking like a lot of different spots of discomfort for me, especially. And I hope that you kind of like foreshadowed like a little bit of that, like a sprinkle like here and there, like a little bit of an aroma of that, like inside this. I'm like, I wonder, and like it's very much abolition. It's very much like giving like that. As, like not only aesthetic but just like that spirit of like okay, there's gonna be some parts of shelving and disrobing ourselves of our anti-blackness and our different biases to the point where it's gonna be disrobing ourselves of things that we actually think that we like but we shouldn't like but we do like, that we have a very deep investment in. And that's the hard part right there. It's the hard part. Like it's the same thing. Like when it comes to like when I talk to like the women and femmes, them like, you know, as like the sisters of het men. Like we've talked about this before, the sisters of het men, and like just like how like I get up on the screen and like I try to like go against the patriarchy, go against all these things. I turn off this camera and I go back to patriarchy because we live in a society, and even the people in my experience of which they say, yeah, I'm feminist, I'm this and that, intersectional, this and that. I read bell hooks, I read Audre Lorde, like all of this shit, right? And then when you do like a little bit of patriarchy, when you perform that shit, like a little bit, like, you know, you put like an accent on that patriarchy, like not too much, not overwhelming, but like just like, you know, like it's a little bit of cayenne pepper on it. Just not that much. Man, look, they love it. Like the women and femmes, them love it. And that's the part of it right there, as well as this conversation, because it's just like, there are parts of these institutions that y'all like we don't realize, that I don't realize how much I benefit from and enjoy. And in order to really engross ourselves into the reality that we say we want, it's going to take a lot of difficult and hard, arduous discourse and ridding oneself of things that are very comfortable for us. Very comfortable.
Yes. Yes.
I liked go for it. Like like I wanted to get like your take on how, because like you mentioned a little bit, like when it comes to just like this nuance between it being between fatness being accepted, like fatness being normalized, fatness being what it is, like it's a state, it's an experience, it's not something that should be a pejorative, it's not something that also should be fetishized or exotified or like put on a pedestal. It should just be like defaulted, neutral. And that's a loaded word as well. But like, so my question about it now is, because you were also talking about the nuance about how it can also be debilitating. It could also be an experience that is a disability. That's an interesting part for me. And it did get murky for me with trying to reconcile with the real tangible health implications surrounding fatness. That's normally reserved for a particular like level of fatness. Like once you get to a particular level of fatness in general, it seems as though like you begin to get into some realms of diseases and a lot of different malignments. The same with underweight. I also had like I don't like the word, but like a fatness doctor, a fatness physician that was talking about just like almost like the parallel between like once you get to a particular level of fatness, you have the same issues as you do when you're underweight, when you're grossly underweight. So like these things should also be like discussed. It's not just fatness that's extremely like fatness at that level that's a problem, or like should like has like these issues, but it's also like the end of the spectrum. My question is, after that long prolix, I talk a lot, Deshaun, please.
That's okay, I do too.
I want you to talk though. Like what is the how do you reconcile with that nuance? This possibility for health issues when it gets to a particular, or maybe that's not even the case. Like, what is your experience with that? Like, when health issues arise from fatness, like how do you reconcile with also pushing for fat liberation in a way? You can't even like talk about it, like fat activism.
So to maybe help you there, I refer to myself as a fat destructionist, because I am clear about the fact that there is no way to get to liberation without destroying something first. And I don't know what happens on the other side of destruction, but I know that if there is a liberation, destruction happens first. So that might help with language, but I want to say that to your point, I think that what is true is that right now, well, not just right now, what has been true for the last several hundred years is that we believe that there are certain quote unquote diseases or conditions that are associated with fatness, because there actually has not been any real research into whether or not that is true, right? A lot of what science has sort of proposed as a result of fatness has really just been causation versus correlation, right? And what has been true is that we have overdetermined, and by we, I really just mean the science community, so not me at all, have overdetermined how much fatness affects quote unquote health versus how much it doesn't. And oftentimes that has to do with the fact that it's going off of structures that have been built as forms of eugenics, right? So thinking again back to BMI, back to the war on obesity, thinking back to the beginning of the diet industry, even thinking to the beginning of the fitness industry in the US, right? So much about all of these things have been tied to white supremacy, been tied to fascism, been tied to anti-fatness as anti-blackness. And so I think a lot of what we think is associated with a lot of what we understand about fatness in terms of what it does and does not cause with regards to health issues is really just overdetermined by anti-fat science and by eugenics and by anti-black science. And so oftentimes fat folks don't actually get treated for their issues, right? They get treated for being fat, and being fat is not an illness. Being fat is not a disease. Being fat is not something to treat. But that's what folks get treated for, and that's what oftentimes leads to fat folks dying, right? It's because we're not being diagnosed, or we're being misdiagnosed, or we don't have access to healthcare because fat folks are the least likely to be hired at a job, right? And so therefore don't have access to healthcare. Fat folks are disproportionately poor and therefore don't have access to finances to pay for healthcare, right? And so all these things are what lead to the death of fat folks. And yet where we sort of are where the conversation sort of stagnated is at the fact that fat folks are dying, and not a question as to what is leading to our deaths. And what's leading to our deaths is not these other illnesses that folks are ascribing to fat folks. And when we talk about anti-fatness as anti-blackness in particular, right, it's black folks who are said to have higher cholesterol or have higher blood pressure or to be more likely diagnosed with diabetes, type 2, all these things, right? But what's not discussed is the fact that Black folks are also in the U.S. in particular make up the majority of the fat population, but make up less than 14% of the U.S. population. And so what becomes true is that so much about how our bodies are engaged are not thought about with regards to, or rather, how our bodies are engaged are oftentimes read through a very white lens, a very anti-Black lens, and doesn't really help to determine what it is that we actually need, right? And so instead, we punish Black folks for what we eat. We punish Black folks for how we eat. We punish Black folks for being more in tune with our actual traditions, right? Our actual cultures. And we say, in order for you to be quote unquote healthy, you have to, and for all intents and purposes, ascribe to whiteness, right? You have to actually be in closer proximity to whiteness. So instead of now eating collard greens and mac and cheese at your mama's house, now you got to eat quinoa and seaweed chips, right? Like, but that's not actually true. And so I value the work of a lot of Black dietitians who are approaching this work with the health at every size approach. Particularly, there's this brilliant dietitian on socials by the name of the Black nutritionist. I think that's her name on there, and she does really incredible work that just basically is like decolonize the way you think about food and decolonize your plate, right? If you want to have fried chicken, if you want to have sweet potato pie, if you want to have oxtails, if you want to have, like whatever it is that our cultures allow for, right? We can have that, and you don't have to revert to or rather convert to this sort of white understanding of eating and of health in order for you to.
What really kills me about it, and what I would love to pick your brain on, is just like this intersection between this infantilization and anti-fatness. It's just like, here you are, well-read, whole-ass author, whole-ass, like lettered, like degreed. And you would still, I'm positive that like if we go in your Twitter threads, you got people that, got like Oakley shades on, got a MAGA hat on, and will still say, Deshaun, pardon me, but you are Black and fat, please. Stop talking. So what's this connection between, like, why do people feel, because I mean it does happen in just like Blackness in general, like people feel like they could like tell a Black person like, hey, just listen to the police, please, just listen to the police. But like, what is this intersection between people feeling as though like they can tell folks that already live in these bodies on a regular basis are actually Black or actually fat, that they could tell them what's better for them and tell them to just lose weight? I'm sorry.
No, you don't have to be. You don't have to be. I just...
It's a lot.
I'm laughing because, a big part of the reason... Also, I saw someone ask me in the chat what HBCU I went to. I went to Morehouse.
You're Morehouse.
But I saw, or not I saw, a big part of the reason why I stopped engaging on Twitter in the ways that I used to. I used to write a bunch of different threads a day about all the things. But it became overwhelming because people who have never read a book, who have never watched a YouTube video, who have never read an article, who have never listened to a podcast, who have never done any type of research on any of these things, would demand, right, that I retract my statement or demand that, or insist that I am wrong, right? When I know for a fact that I've done years more worth of research than they have ever done. And it wasn't just, the white sunglasses, MAGA hat wearing people. It was a lot of us.
Yeah.
It's a lot of us. And it's because we buy into the white sunglass wearing, MAGA hat wearing ideologies that have led us here. Yeah. And so it is very... It kills me. It's just like... This shit is outrageous, and I don't know that I have anything more to say to y'all. So now a lot of my shit, exists on podcasts or in videos or in written content, because not because I don't enjoy dialogue, and I really appreciate dialogue, and I appreciate being able to engage in meaningful conversation. But what I don't appreciate is how particularly violent people can be when you choose to name that fat folks have a right to exist. And also, not only do they have a right to exist, but I've done extensive research on why what we know about fatness is harmful. I don't appreciate being engaged by folks like that who have not only not done any of the research, but also have zero interest in hearing you, right? Mm-hmm. Conversations, to me, they require that I am being heard, and they require a certain level of openness from the other person, a certain level of willingness to learn, to hear, to grow, in ways that oftentimes don't happen online. And so, yeah, I've had to disengage.
and it's like this, and you see it like a lot also, like it manifests in cartoons and media and just in general, like your Peter Griffins, your Homer Simpsons, like this bumbling, jolly, carefree, effervescent, like person that is fat. And it just devoids them. It's like this correlation that they make between, like, it devoids them of any type of sense, any type of, and also just like any type of range. Like, while I, I might just be like, I think the fat culture critic Sarah said that I'm maybe small fat, like maybe like I can't even like claim it. I'm just like a person that. I'm an athlete in a bulking phase. Like that's me. I'm in a perpetual bulking phase. But like,
I have thoughts for you, but I want you to finish first.
Please.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, and please feel free to go and just like tear me out the frame with this shit. I love my mind being blown with this. But yeah, like it's this thing where like I see like a lot of folks not allowing me to be anything but jolly. Like I don't get the ability to be brooding or sad or even serious sometimes, to the point like where it might be the Caribbean in me, but like I don't really take myself that serious. Like like what I mean? Like Caribbean people are notorious for being very unserious people. Like like someone will
tell me.
So like it is sometimes it feels weird, like this limitation, like skinny white men. Like if you want to see someone that got a whole range of their emotions, talk to like one of them skinny white dudes. Like they could do anything. They got all the individuality. Like they could dress however they want to dress. They could act however they want to act, and like it's just like, oh yeah, that's just Bob from accounting. But like me, when my ass go out here talking about just like I feel depressed, like, or just like things like that, or when I sing sad songs, I'm like, damn, I didn't expect this coming from you. Why do you sing such sad songs? I'm like, because I listen to Morrissey than the Smiths. The fuck, like I'm a sad ass nigga. But I don't get that duality, and it just shows like how not only fatness but just blackness too has like this limited range of expression, and like people expect you to show up in a particular way, and I'd love to know like how people expect even you to show up, like especially like in your line of work, because I could expect like there's like this duality where like despite you writing all of this shit, like people will still engage with you in the same rhetorics that you debunk, because that happens to me a lot. Like
Yes.
But also please tell me your thoughts on what I was saying as well. I'd love to hear.
Yes. No. Yes. So one, yes, people do engage me. Engage me this way all the time. One, I am always expected to educate, right? I think that there was one night I was out at dinner with some friends of mine, literally at dinner, mind you. I've been drinking. I'm not thinking about none of this shit. I'm out here having a good time with my friends, with my folks. And someone walked up to me who recognized me from my work and was just like, started having a whole conversation about my work. And I'm like, yo, we had a bar. Like what do you like? I'm not interested in this, right? So it's like, yeah, people expect you to always show up ready to engage a conversation, not realizing that the conversation they are expecting or demanding that you engage are conversations that are about your real life, right?
Yes.
That are about your actual experience. So, right, I'm doing a lot of research and all the things, but this is actually about my life.
Yeah.
And when I'm out at dinner
content.
or when I'm right, this is not content. This is not like, I'm just gonna hop on TikTok and just make a funny video about some random shit. Like, this is my life. So it's like, so that's one thing. But to your earlier point, I wanted to say something in response to that because I also saw another comment about muscularity. Mm-hmm. And so here's why I don't use the words skinny and thin interchangeably, right? I think that skinny is very particular, that it is very specific to folks with smaller frames. For me, thin is encompassing of all folks who are not fat, right? I wouldn't call you fat, foreign. I wouldn't call you fat. And I think that there's this push and pull in the spaces that we are in right now, or in this like sort of era that we're in right now, where a lot of folks are like, I mean, I want to show that I'm not angry about being referred to as such, right? I want to show that I don't mind showing, like, I don't mind being engaged in that way. And I also think that it does a bit of a disservice to the larger conversation around how fatness works or how fatness is engaged, because then the conversation becomes about smaller fat folks always, right?
Absolutely,
and those of us
right.
who are in larger bodies end up being pushed out of the conversation entirely.
Yes.
But what I also want to say about that is that thinness is a politic, right? And it is a politic that is positioned always and already as antithetical to fatness, which is to say that anyone who is not fat, who is not engaged as a fat person, who is removed from the ways that fat folks are engaged by and large, is thin. They are not fat, because these are, again, this is not just something that you ascribe to. It's not like
Mm-hmm.
a YouTube channel that you click subscribe on, right? This is like it's political. It's a politic. It is a positionality, and it is how you are engaged in the world. And so while larger muscular folks oftentimes do experience the sort of ramifications of or the back end of anti-fatness, because they're in larger bodies and it is about being against larger bodies. What they are not experiencing is the direct effect of, or the direct harm of anti-fatness. And I think that when you're not experiencing the direct harm or the direct harm of anti-fatness, the direct violence of anti-fatness, you are not someone that is being engaged as fat, and therefore you are not fat. And so I think that framing is very important and very significant, because it makes clear who exactly we're talking about in these conversations and who we are not. And also it's clear about the fact that even if we're not talking about you as a fat person, you can still very much experience anti-fat violence because of how far-reaching it is. In the same ways that non-Black folks experience the residue of anti-Blackness, right? White folks who grow up in poor areas and are displaced from their communities are not, experiencing anti-Blackness. They're not Black people, and yet they experience the violence of anti-Blackness because gentrification isn't anti-Black violence. And so that is the type of framing that I use to show up in these conversations.
Thank you so much for giving me language for that. Like, because it's an experience, like it's something that like I've always wanted to like ruminate on, because while I definitely have suffered from anti-fatness, like my mom, like I talk about like my mom like going to jog with her, like because like she of course like she was Miss Bahamas at one point, like so pageantry like I stood no chance, like you know what I mean, like I had to like engage with all of these rather unhealthy ways to engage with desirability. So I was jogging with her at 5 o'clock in the morning. I was drinking Slim Fast at 5. I was like, eating the little prepackaged meal. I forget what it's called. But like all of them things, like the frozen meals, all of those things, like and while I wasn't what we're discussing right now, like when I'm in community with folks that are like infinifat or like degrees larger than me, it just feels extremely irresponsible for me to talk about, yeah man, like being a fat dude, like yeah, I do, like I consider like me to have some fat on me, but I don't think like it's necessarily something that is so inextricable to my experience that like immediately when people see me they are thinking about fatness. Like it's not the same thing, and it's something that like I have like a difficulty engaging with. Sarah, the fat culture critic, who like I said cited your book. Like we were talking about it before, and like just like all of these different categories, and like I felt really weird lamenting about my struggle as like I'm an athlete. Like shoots, I play sports, and like the fatness that I feel isn't the same type of fatness that she felt. And like the type of discrimination that she engaged with, like, yeah, when I do go to be taped up and measured and everything, like they're just like, oh, like, you're fat, like they say like you're obese, you're in the obesity spectrum, your BMI is high, like I want to get looked at for sleep apnea because I'd be snoring, but like even that, like I'd love to know what your thoughts on that is, because like I'm scared to like even think about like what they would say. They're just like, they've told me to lose more weight so I could sleep better. And I'm just like, okay, well,
that's what they tell you.
That's what they tell you. So like,
that's what they tell you.
It's like this weird thing that like I have like this dichotomy with, as it pertains to that. I really want to ask you, like, this is like my last big one. This intersection between gender queerness and fatness. Because like I've seen that this is something that when I engage with like more fat folks, they almost say that like by virtue of engaging with this level of introspection pertaining to your fatness, you sort of come up on the shores of gender queerness. And like in many ways, like once you reach a particular degree of fatness, even the clothing is just gender neutral. Like, like you find pockets, like and all this other stuff. Like, so I'm very curious about like, especially like if you would like, you're engaging with gender and your expression as Black and like queer, like mask presenting, and also just like the fatness interpolated with all that. I'm really curious on like how like you figured that shit out, like, because that's really hard for me. Just like gender expression in general.
This is going to be a longer conversation. So
okay, go for it.
Before I start, let me say to Freddie P's question, that was so people who exercise to gain weight and bulk up are still pursuing thinness, if I have that right. Freddie, that is correct, right? Or at the very least, they are still engaged in what is in practice, right, in anti-fat practice, right? Because more often than not, most people who want to bulk up do not. They're eating and trying to get bigger, not as a way to look fat, but as a way to be muscular, right? I've not ever met a person who's like, I want to get fat. I want to bulk up so I can be fat. I've never met that person. If you've met that person, please put me in contact with them, because I want to talk to them. I want to love on them. I want to appreciate them. But I've never met that person. So there's still this investment, even as you are wanting to get bigger, in not being fatter, just being bigger in size, which is really to say just being muscular, because there is a way that the way that fatness is proportioned on our bodies is still positioned as more valuable and more desirable than folks who are just fat, right? It's this. I wrote about this years ago, back in 2017, I think. The dichotomy between thick and fat, right? Where we want folks who are thick, right? Folks who, if you are a woman or a femme presenting person, folks want you to have, a flat stomach but a fat ass, right? If you're a man, right, they want you to have big arms, they want you to have big thighs, right? But you might have a little bit of a gut, but you can't have a gut that hangs too low. It has to be toned. It has to be this. It has to be that, right? There's this connection between anti-fatness and the dichotomy of fatness and thickness. And in that same way, it's this dichotomy between fatness and muscularity, and this practice that you must be invested in when it comes to bulking, right? Because the idea is to be muscular, to be larger in size while muscular and not fat. And so to answer your question now, Foreign, there's so much there. So I am a trans person. I am non-binary, use they, them pronouns. And my relationship to my genderlessness, because I actually very rarely refer to myself now as non-binary, because non-binary for a lot of the mainstream, which really is to say white folks, has become a third gender. And I am very interested in being genderless, particularly because I think that Black folks, I take the work of Hortense Spillers very seriously, where she says that Black folks are ungendered, which is to say that we're removed from the possibility of gender by way of the transatlantic slave trade. To read more about that, you can read her work, Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe. It's a brilliant essay from the 80s that was republished later on. It's brilliant. As you likely know, I write about this in chapter 6 of the book, where so much about transness is by and large determined by your size, right? When we think about the construction of gender was created for white people first and foremost, and it was to be man and woman. Woman was positioned, or woman was created so that men had someone to dominate, someone to have power over. That was the entire purpose of this positionality, a first and second class citizen. Black folks were slaves. We weren't citizens at all. So there was no first and second class. It was just first, second, slave. But again, so much about the creation of the slave is also the creation of anti-fatness as an ideology. And so when you think about gender, what's true about gender is that gender was not just created for white people, but created more specifically for white thin people. Because again, those folks who this was mirrored after were French and Scottish white men, right? European white men and white people, who are just, if you've ever seen European white men, y'all, like these men are scrawny, they're small, okay? right? And I'm not like shaming anyone's body or anything, but they just are small. They just are. They're short and they're small, and it's just a different reality. This is how we get gender as a construct. So once we arrive to this construction, right? Once we arrive at the site of gender as being man and woman, and as being thin, when you are both black and fat, right? It's sort of this double experience of violence where you are more deeply removed from any possibility of being gendered, and yet it's the language that I want to use for this is a bit complicated, but I think it's important, and it's how I understand this concept. It's a bifurcated experience, and I'll explain what that means. So there are some brilliant scholars by the name of Saidiya Hartman and also by the name of Zakiya Iman Jackson. And both of them talk about slave humanity, or the bifurcated human animal experience, where black folks are, in other words, sort of removed from any possibility of, or rather are given access to being thought of as human, only so that we can be removed from any possibility of humanity, right? So folks will say, black folks are human, right? But also black folks have no rights, right? Black folks are human, right? But also, constitutionally speaking, if if you're a felon, right, you are still a slave. And we know that the majority of the makeup of our carceral system is niggas. So again, means to sort of experience a sort of bifurcated human animal experience. And so when I use it in this way, I'm saying that we are positioned in a way that forces us into being gendered as man or as woman, as boy or as girl, right? When we're first born, they look and see, you have this genitalia, you don't have this genitalia, so you are this or this, right? And that, of course, doesn't even include, or often excludes and becomes an experience for why they're marginalized, intersex folks.
Yes.
For very different reasons, right? But when this gendering happens, we are then socialized into how we're supposed to present in the world, while also being removed from any real possibility of being this gender that we've been assigned, right? So black boys are taught how to be men, but at the same time are very clear in those teachings that they are different from white boys, right? Black girls are taught in many different ways, through social institutions like schools, religion, media, etc. They're taught how to be girls, but are also very clear from the beginning that they are not white girls, right? And so this distinction is important, because when you start adding fatness as a layer on top of that, it becomes even more clear that this bifurcated experience is one that is only made possible because of white supremacy, because of anti-blackness, right? So I had to give all of that to get into what I want to really talk about. And that is to say, fat black trans folks, for example, who want to have gender-affirming surgeries are oftentimes charged 2 to 3 times more than thin/white counterparts, right? Fat folks oftentimes have a much harder time finding binders or underwear that fit them and that feel affirming in their bodies, right? All of these are like different experiences of fat trans folks, oftentimes fat black trans folks, who are moving in the world in a way where we are trying to be more affirmed in our gender or genderlessness, right? But oftentimes what feels affirming in these bodies is produced by the construction of gender in the first place. We wouldn't have to experience the violence of undergoing gender affirming surgeries or having to find and be disappointed by not finding binders or underwear that fit and that feel comfortable if man and woman weren't social constructions that we were forced into, that we were taught to believe are the only ways to be in the world. And so when you are non-binary, when you are removed from any real possibility of gender, and you're fat becomes its own gender of sorts. It becomes it becomes a totally separate gender, right? Where, for example, think about this: when you are watching porn, right? Oftentimes you'll have like straight porn and gay porn, and then you'll have BBW porn, right? So a whole different category.
Really?
For a lot of times, yes.
I know that
the
straight
category.
and gay ones are like segregated, but like I didn't realize that. God damn.
Sometimes, not on every site. I know there's a lot of sites out there, but even on the more popular ones like Pornhub or Xvideos or whatever, when you go to certain categories, right, BBW has to have its own category because of the ways that fat black women or fat women in general are fetishized and positioned or placed into a sort of their own category that produces the type of fetish porn that is necessary for it to happen. But even beyond that, when you go into a clothing store, right, you have men, women, and then you have plus size, or you have big and tall, right?
Yeah.
A completely different gendered category, because what's understood is that men and women look a particular way, and for those of us who exist outside of that realm, we are gendered in a very different way. And so for me, as someone who is trans and actually who's committed to not shaving my beard, because I don't feel unaffirmed by my beard. I enjoy my beard. I appreciate my beard, right? And who oftentimes will show up in the world in very fluid ways, right? Like I'm sitting here dressed like this, and then there will be some times where I will be dressed in heels and a blouse and with lip gloss on and things of that nature, right? But people still have to categorize you based off of what gender they are. They are told that you are, right, based off on how you present. And so because of how we categorize gender, fatness existing as its own gender of sorts still oftentimes leaves trans people positioned in a very particular way that it's like positioned inside of and outside of a particular gender all at one time. And so when you're someone who wants to be genderless, it becomes impossible almost to do outside of in name, because people don't know how to engage you. They don't know what it means to engage someone who looks like what they are told a woman or a man is supposed to look like, but who perhaps presents or speaks or engages in a very different way. And it just becomes a very complicated experience, and one that is sort of cemented and structured by the medical industry, again, because of how fat folks are expected to pay different prices in comparison to our thin counterparts, or through clothing industries because of how that's constructed, right? Through racialized sexual categories and the ways that there's this sort of overlap between how, and this sort of goes back to Kellogg's and Grams too. I forgot about Grams crackers, but fat folks are sort of positioned with regards to sex, right? And I think that this is there is a conversation to be had that I really want to have, and that I'm in the process of thinking through and writing about, and other things about pornography, fetishization, sex, and anti-fatness as anti-blackness, and the sort of overlap between these things, and how we have sort of overdetermined fetishization as a liberatory practice that is determined by and large by how folks are gendered, and therefore also how people are having to force themselves to be gendered in like a in a sex work in a sense of being a sex worker because of how folks engage your body. And I'm saying this as someone who is a former sex worker and who knows intimately what that experience is like. All these things play a significant role in how gender is constructed and how fatness functions as a part of or not a part of these gendered experiences. So it makes it particularly hard because fat Black women, especially dark-skinned Black women, especially trans Black women, right, who are oftentimes masculinized despite how they show up in the world. Where you will also have fat men engaged in a way where they too are masculinized in a way that positions them as people or things rather who are capable of being or of doing more than what a human is supposed to be able to do, right? Mm-hmm. I think about Mike Brown and how Darren Wilson said that he ran through bullets like the Hulk, right? There is just a lot to explore about how gender and fatness play a significant role in how folks are read, who gets read as what, and also what we see as liberatory versus confining and marginal, like something that marginalizes us because of our bodies, because of our gender or genderlessness. And I think the most common example people have used as of late is how oftentimes non-binary identity is often thought about as white, thin people who would be read as women who sort of mask up their appearance. Mm-hmm. And when you exist outside of that, you don't really get access to what it means to be genderqueer or non-binary or anything of that sort. And so, yeah, I think that there's just a lot to talk about when it comes to gender and fatness and Blackness. I will say that there is a chapter that I wrote for an anthology coming out next year that is about this. It's about gender, fatness, and anti-Blackness that I think folks should read when it comes out, because there's so much to talk about with regards to gender and fatness and anti-Blackness, and exactly how they overlap and exactly how much they determine how folks are read in the world.
There's so much there that like I'm really excited. I know you got like another book coming out. You got your podcast too. We've linked a lot in here, and I want to be respectful for your time. So if you do have some more time for like a couple more,
you're good.
Q&As,
I'm good,
yeah. I'm telling you, like everybody in here just loves you. I don't know if you've glanced at the chat recently, but like,
I haven't yet. Let me go look at the chat.
It is just overwhelming. I haven't seen this much love. But like, I really appreciate that. Like you got the book coming out. And if y'all ain't, of course, like y'all have probably seen, I'm going to put it back on the screen. This is probably like, in my opinion, I know you probably say different because you're humble, but like mandatory reading on like fat abolitionment, like the ideas, the carceral way that we look at our bodies. I read the Sabrina Strings book, Fear the Black Body, immensely for preparation for this last video. I definitely want to check out like a lot of these questions in here. I'm scrolling up. Y'all drop any questions that y'all would like. Deshaun, you don't see any inside here, right? There's a lot. Like I said, there's a lot of.
I'm looking. I'm still scrolling. I'm like, damn. There's a lot of comments when I was talking.
You was spit, like I'm telling you.
I was saying the comments are wild on Twitter, so I don't do like those threads anymore. I don't have an active YouTube channel. I do have one, but I don't have an active one. However, there are a lot of videos of me on YouTube because I record a lot with my friend Justin, or King of Reads. And also just like interviews that I've done have been put up on YouTube. So there are things out there that you can watch from me, but I can't. I'll leave this to Foreign and the other folks who can handle all the comments, because folks.
I ain't seen no Twitter clock box yet. Like, I mean, like your Twitter's very diplomatic. Like, I was like,
it's very chill. You must have just followed me like recently, because if you knew me prior to the release of my book, so literally if you knew me prior to 2021, I was wilding on Twitter. I'm not gonna hold you. I was like everything. Not like in a bad way. It was my politics was always solid, but I was very much like on niggas' asses because folks will be in your mentions thinking they can talk to you any kind of way, and I'm like, y'all have no idea. Like, this is still a real person on the other side of the screen. You might not see that shit on Twitter no more, but just know I'm still out here.
Oh my god. I'm looking through this. This is just amazing. I really appreciate like all of the love, and I really want y'all like, where can people find you talking shit and being diplomatic as well as like long form, video form, like you got some podcasts floating around, just like, but anywhere like, or any causes in particular that you would like to direct attention to and traffic to?
A lot of places. You can find me on Twitter and on Instagram and TikTok at DashaunLH. So just my name, DashaunLH. You in my Twitter and my Instagram bio, you will find a link tree, and that link tree has a link to my website, my Patreon, lots of things that you can find me to. I'm pretty, as Foreign says, I'm pretty diplomatic online these days, but I do have a lot of projects that I'm working on, and some of those consist of interviews, both on podcast and just like video interviews. I also am 1/5 of the host of Unsolicited Fatties Talk Back. You can find me there. Unsolicited Fatty Talks Back is another, or just it's the podcast that I'm part of, and I really enjoy being there with my folks. We are, I don't want to say a conglomerate, but a group of fat folks. All of us are fat. Most of us are black. Some of us are trans. All of us are queer, and we're just talking about fatness in our different intersections, and sort of debunking a lot of really harmful practices. And so, yeah. Yes. Look. I gotta pull up. I'm ready. I'm excited. I'm ready.
It's happening. Like I mean that shit. Like you are always welcome over here. Like I'm seeing Crash and Phantom got like another question for you. Crash and Phantom Lord, like you are Deshaun Stan. Like I talking about like the energy. What's the best way to engage LGBTQIA plus spaces as a cishet black male trying to educate himself? I really want to know. I mean, I assume this is for me. And like that's like talking to people like Deshaun, like actually like bringing folks like Deshaun. I mean, like of course, like you're in the auteur space and all of these like think piece spaces, but like bringing, of course, like people like Deshaun, people that are in the written text format or maybe the podcast format, to places where like I am not equipped to have these discussions. Like I said, Sisters of Het. Like, you know, big body foreign, like deadlifting 800, like, you know, it is what it is. Like I'm like beach body foreign. So like I can't have all the discussions that I want. So like I really appreciate when folks like Deshaun come out and show up. And like I said, like bringing the book to life, like you bringing it into like a real format. And this is powerful.
Look, I want to say, to that question, I think that yes to what you just said, and also having conversations with other cishet folks who perhaps know more than you, who have been with and have engaged LGBTQ folks perhaps more thoughtfully than you have, is also very important. I think that a lot of times people expect cishet folks are not trying to build community with us; they're trying to make us their teachers. And what I have found is that when I build relationships with people with identities that I do not have or occupy, right? It's about the only time that it has been beneficial, right? It's when it's about building a genuine relationship and not making them, you know, a quota to be met so that I can say I have this person in my corner, right? And so oftentimes I will say things like, it's about being an accomplice, it's about being what some would say a comrade, and less about being an ally, because ally or allyship implies that you are thinking solely of this person as political, and an accomplice to me indicates that you are interested in this person as a person and building relationships and being in right relationship with them. So that's how I think about that. But I also was going to say to you, Foreign, none, you nor any other cis man is as cis or as het as y'all think that y'all are. And we're gonna leave it there.
Okay. All right, then fine. I'm fine with that. Like, we ain't ended there. Like, I love that. Like, oh, everybody.
I mean,
like,
you weren't wrong though. They do put in work from the bottom. You were not wrong. You were very correct. And I support you on this journey, Foreign. I do.
Look, we about to, Deshaun, we about to wrap things up because these niggas ain't got no goddamn sense.
I'm ready. I'm gonna hit you up.
All right. Thank you so much, family. I really do appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me, for real.
All right. Take time, Deshaun.
Yes, sir.
A foreign man in a foreign land.